Hi everybody, my name is Tamara and I am with the Lotus Education and Arts Foundation, and we are here today to show you how to put together your very own wooden framed lantern. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors for this project. They include the Bloomington Urban and Enterprise Association, Old National Bank, the Hamilton Lugar School of Global International Studies, which is the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, as well as the Center for the Study of Global Change. We also want to show you what the lantern will look like, because that will get your mouth wetted or maybe your hands active. So this is what the lantern will look like, and we're going to start by showing you how to put the wooden frame together.
All right, great. This is Marc Tschida. I'm the Operations and Business Manager for Lotus, but I also do a little bit of woodworking. So I actually cut the component pieces for the lantern that I am going to be assembling as a demonstration to you guys. So you should have several pieces in front of you. You should have two, these are 6 inch by 6 inch pieces. One is a top and one is a bottom. The top one has a large circular hole at the top, and the bottom one is solid, although both sets of these have 4 corner holes drilled in. And then the top also has 2 additional holes drilled in that we will use to attach yarn or some type of string to allow us to carry this. In addition to the top and the bottom, you will have 4 dowels that are all the same length, 4 wooden dowels. And when I'm done with this section here, we will assemble something like this. And then once we have it to this, I'm going to throw this over to Tamara, and she will take you through some of the ways to decorate it and to personalize it to complete your lantern. So, some of the tools that we've assembled to do this, in addition to the wooden pieces, are wood glue. White glue will work if that's what you have around the house. You don't need to run out and get wood glue. I also have a Q-tip, and then I have a small piece of scrap paper. Really any paper will do. And then we also have a piece of wax paper. Now, the wax paper, I'm going to sit down underneath my components because we're going to use that to catch any glue that might seep through our project here and onto the table. So just to be aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and just dry fit things, but I will go through the demonstrations or the motions as if I'm using glue. So the one thing to be aware of is that for the pieces that I've cut, the top and the bottom, I drilled these corner holes at the same time, and the way to remind me to allow me to line those holes back up again is I drew a little pencil mark that runs from the top to the bottom piece. And I know when the final project is assembled, those 2 pencil pieces are going to be right on top of each other or in line with each other. And then that makes sure that the wooden dowels are straight that are going to hold the lantern together. It's not the end of the world. If they're not lined up exactly, your lantern just might skew just a hair, but it's still ultimately going to work. So what I would do is I would start with the wood glue or Elmer's white glue and put a little bit of glue on your piece of paper here. And just a reminder, I'm going to mimic the motion, so you didn't see any glue actually coming out of that. So I'm going to start with my bottom piece. I've got my wood glue on the piece of paper. I'm going to take one of these wooden dowels and I'm just going to roll the edge of it, the bottom, in the wood glue or the white glue. And I'm really interested in getting the glue on the side here for the first 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. I'm not necessarily concerned with getting it on the bottom of the dowel. But you're going to basically take your dowel, you roll that little edge right in the wood glue, and then you're going to put it into your wooden frame here. It shouldn't take any pressure, but sometimes it's helpful if you kind of rotate the wooden dowel as you're putting it into the base piece. You will then repeat that process 3 more times. 2 more times. And finally the last time for the bottom pieces. And so you can, if you'd like, lift this piece up and kind of make sure the wooden dowels are flush with the bottom edge of the piece there. That's just really aesthetics though. It's not going to change the structural integrity. Okay, so once we have the project, the lantern assembled this far, what you'll then do is take your Q-tip and put that in the glue, and you're going to do the same thing on the top part of these dowels. You're going to get just a little bit of glue on that top 1/8 or 1/4 inch of that wooden dowel, and you'll do it to all 4 of the wooden dowels at the same time. You know, I referenced earlier the pencil mark, and this is where the pencil mark comes into play. So for me, my pencil mark on the bottom piece is right here. And so I want to make sure the pencil mark on the top piece, which is right here, is going to be in line with that. And that allows me to know that the holes I've drilled are all matched up to the appropriate hole on the lower level. So we've put glue on the top. I'm kind of set this up. I've just set the lid on here, the top of the lantern. And you're going to have to go around kind of corner by corner, but you'll eventually get the wooden dowels lined up with the holes on the top of the lantern. And once again, a little bit of pressure is going to do you good. You shouldn't need to pound, or you shouldn't need a hammer or anything. And then yeah, once those are all lined up, we're kind of done with my section of this little tutorial. Just be aware, if you have some excess glue, just get a wet towel, wet paper towel, and you can wipe some of that excess glue off at this point. From here, you're probably going to want to let this sit for 10 minutes or so. That'll allow the glue to dry, and it'll get it nice and stable for the next part, which Tamara is going to show you, which is where she will use construction paper and tissue paper or wax paper to design kind of an outside skin for this particular lantern. So great, thanks so much for following along here. Just one other quick tip, when you're working with glue, for most things, a little bit of glue goes a long way. So you don't really need to pour glue on this to make it work. All right, great. Thank you so much, and enjoy your lantern.
So you learned how to put the frame together, right? So this is what you have right now. And you want to be able to put some kind of wrap or casing around it. What do I mean by a wrap or casing? Well, you can see right here. And if you look at this design, what you're going to notice is that on this side you've got some kind of black piece of paper with tissue paper behind it. And if you look on this side, you see that I've got leaves and wax paper. Now I want to tell you how I did each part of this, and then also give you ideas, because you are not limited. There are so many different ways you can decorate this. But you do want to keep in mind that the point of creating this lantern is to let light shine through, so you want to have some kind of vehicle to do that. You want to make sure light can shine through, so it can't be too thick paper, or you have to have holes or spaces for the light to shine through. So let's look at some ideas. Now, when I was growing up, we used wax paper a lot and ironed leaves in wax paper. Wax paper is something that everybody can find at the grocery store, right? And I'm just showing you some 12-inch long wax paper. And that's important because you know that from building this lantern that the dimensions, the height right here is 8.5 inches. And we discovered that if you wrap an 8.5 by 11 around, it goes from about halfway, it can cover half of your lantern. But even easier is if you cut one of those sheets into smaller, so 8.5 height, but 5 inches long. That'll give you each of your sides, especially if you want different sides showing different things. So let's look at this wax paper. I've been working with 9-inch long, and let me show you this to you, 9-inch long wax paper, knowing that I had a 12-inch dimension right here. And I'll kind of show it to you right here. 12 inches long, but 9 inches this way, so that what I have is a piece that I can cut down to be the right size. And that's important because if you put something in wax paper, let's talk about wax paper for a minute. Wax paper, you may not know this, has a waxy side and a less waxy side. How are you going to know that? If you take this roll out of here, it's going to have a natural curl, and the waxy side is the inner side, and the less waxy side is the outside. So when you've cut your 9-inch piece, you're cutting one piece and then another and putting them together. And whatever you want to capture in that wax paper, you put it between the two waxy sides of the wax paper. You will take an iron, maybe to protect your iron, you'll put a cloth underneath, because maybe you don't want wax on your iron. Some of us have irons we never use, so we're happy to let wax drop there. And then you want to you want to iron the edges. You might ask, well, what heat should the iron be on? It can be as hot as you like. You won't be keeping it on very long. So hot enough, I'd say, at least halfway. My iron doesn't even work very well. I don't know how yours works, so feel free to experiment. But you want to wax something in, making sure you have at least an inch margin all the way around, because if you don't seal it, then your things will fall up and down throughout your wax paper. So it's important not just to seal the edges, but also the pieces in between, so that leaves or whatever item you put in between the wax paper does not fall. We have had people in our workshops put in designs, like draw a leaf and iron it in. You can iron almost anything in. You can iron your trees or your stars. So you can have a lot of different things you iron in. But again, you remember that the reason you're using wax paper is that all of the wax paper itself is translucent, so it lets a lot of light pass through. So that's one of the things you want to keep in mind. If you look at this more closely, you might see that I have all kinds of hash marks. And the hash marks are to remind me that when I'm placing something in it, I'm allowing a margin here and a margin here. So I'll say margin here and margin here, so that when I cut it down, I still have everything edged in the seal of the wax paper, and it'll fit my lantern. So let me show you what happens when I trim it. When I trim it to size, it should fit very nicely. So I'll just put it here. I trimmed the top a little bit, I trimmed the bottom, and it's going to kind of cover both of the dowel rods here, and that's what I wanted to do. We'll talk about how we stick it on in a minute, but I want to cut it to size to make sure I have the right piece. You know about cutting, right? Always cut less at first and then trim in small increments, because getting something exactly the right size, that's the trick. And you should also know that if it's not exactly the right size, that's going to be just fine, because these are pieces that can be exchanged. Maybe you don't like what you made the first time. Try something else. Maybe you'll make it better the second time. So this is not something you have to say, oh, I messed it up. You're not going to mess it up. It's going to be great no matter what you do. So the other kind of decoration we were working on, especially for this project, is what is called a transparency, because you've got a black or pretty dark colored piece of cardstock. And cardstock, if you've ever bought it you can get it at Target, Walmart, really an art store online, you can get it almost anywhere. But it's purposefully stiff, and it's nice that it's stiff, because then when you cut out a shape, you have a very defined shape, and you can put the tissue paper behind it. So I've used black cardstock pretty often, because there's nothing like black cardstock to show off a color behind it. Tissue paper, you know where to get that, right? Tissue paper. You can cut out your design. Now, are you good at freehand? I'm not. So one of the things I did is I took some time with some stencils. I made stencils and then put the stencil down, and I would just draw the edges like this until I have a design I like a lot. So you draw your design. Once I've drawn my design, I would take my X-Acto knife. X-Acto knives are not to be handled if you are inexperienced with them. If you are a younger person with no experience with an X-Acto knife, maybe do it under the supervision of an adult. They can cut. They're sharp. So you can even wear gloves, like work gloves, if you want to protect your hands. But what you do want to make sure is that you recognize that this is very sharp, because we don't want any injuries. I will say that we've had many Lotus workshops and come away without an injury, so there's a possibility of doing it safely. So you take your X-Acto knife, it has a point, and you will just start cutting out your shape, making sure that when you cut out, you've got a surface under you that's safe to cut on. So what would that surface be? Well, a wood cutting board is great, because when you cut veggies up in the kitchen, you know that you do that on a cutting board. So make sure that your surface is protected. We are very lucky to have these wonderful pads right here that we can cut directly on, which is important because we don't want to cut in plastic. So again, when you're cutting your pieces out, you want to make sure that what you're doing, and I'm just going to cut a little bit more here so you can just see one little piece that I've cut out. I'm not getting very much of it done because it takes time. And you may decide, based on your patience level, that you might want to do more or less. Here I've made a tiny little space, a little hole in this black piece. And what I do want you to see is a little space won't let very much light through, right? So that's why I drew something this size, right? You want to have something that lets light through. But you will notice when you put a piece of tissue paper behind, that light shines through. And that's the point. The point is that light shines through. So the larger your space, the more light will shine through. And you want that to happen. Now, how do you get your tissue paper to stick? Well, you definitely want to cut off a piece that's the right size. Now right now my hole is so small, it's going to be easy to cover just like this. But I need glue. I need glue, and you don't want to use the wood glue. That's really sticky and wet and messy. So what you want is something that is dry, relatively dry. So glue stick works really well for this. So you take your glue stick, you just put it around the outside because nobody's going to see this side, and you stick your piece, and it doesn't have to be very big, on top. And you make sure it's nicely attached. You lift it up, and now you've got it stuck behind. Now, you might have decided that you wanted to do just the outline of a tree, not the entire space of a tree, just for example. So how you do your design is really up to you. But I highly encourage you to draw the design in advance before you start cutting it out. You can draw it directly on here. You don't need a stencil. A stencil is only if you think, I'm not sure and I really want it to be perfect. You might work on a stencil that way. So, again, you want to make sure that you're gluing to the side you drew on and the side you cut on, because then it'll make a nice clean front. When you get your various parts done, you could make it entire transparency. You could make it entirely of wax paper. But when you've got your 4 pieces, you want to attach them to your lantern. So we have found that it is possible to glue on these dowel rods. It's possible to use glue, but I recommend against using glue because earlier I said these are works that you can change the artwork on, and if you glue something down here, it's going to be so hard to take it off. So if you're using tape, this is double-sided sticky tape. This is available at any store. You can just eyeball this, the length of your lantern, or almost the length of your lantern. Put it all the way up and all the way down. Then you're going to get another piece, because you always need 2 pieces or you will not be able to attach the piece properly. You also notice that I put this sideways. It's really hard to do if it's not sideways. Again, it doesn't have to be the entire length, but you want it to have most of the length for up and down. And then you're just using your eyeball to try to figure out how to get this nicely and squarely on the lantern. You also want to make sure that you keep it as taut as you can, because if it's not taut, it'll kind of blow in on itself. Now, if you notice with the sticky tape, when I put on the sticky tape, I actually curled it around the edge, because when I go on this side, I'm going to need another piece. So when I put this side on, I've already got half of the sticky tape here. I'll put another sticky tape, length of tape here. You can see how hard this is. I wouldn't be doing it if it were too hard. You have to know that. Here I just got something that was a little too long. Not to worry. I have scissors. Cutting it down. And now I've got this side done. Oh yeah, there goes my piece right there. Again, not to worry. This thing can also be glued or attached later on. We put this on here and we get a nice clean edge. And again, I just cut these to size. So now what you see is not much of a design here because I didn't cut much of one, but you see this, and you already see that we're halfway there. So making these at home, let's just review what you will need. You'll need your cardstock. Doesn't have to be black, could be any color. but cardstock so that you have something nice and firm behind which you'll cut. You've also got your wax paper, because putting things in wax paper allows a lot of light to come through. And then you've got your sticky tape, because you need your sticky tape to get it on. And again, it's double-sided tape, double-sided sticky tape. And you have made your lantern. Now there's one more part. Mark told you at the beginning, and you have the template on the PDF that's on our website. You will need a handle. You can choose anything you want for a handle, but why do you even need a handle? You think you could just put it in your window. In fact, here I've got the same purple thread. It's nice to carry a lantern, right? Lanterns were used to light your path when you were walking. So how you do this, there's a variety of ways, but this is open so you can see from this side how I would do that. I would cut a length off. I don't know. I decide how long I want it. And then I'm going to just, in this case, because I have thread that's a little too thick to go through, because you want skinny holes up here. The holes should be skinnier than the dowel rods. You're putting it through. I like to put a little knot, because then it makes it really clean. There's no way anyone, once you've got this all lit, there's no way anyone can see how that handle is even attached. It's kind of sleight of hand, right? Sleight of eye. So you tie, you can just, whatever you're using, yarn is strong, some kind of twine is strong, but even just regular string decoration is good. So you can see that I'm tying a bunch of different knots. That's because I want to make sure this doesn't come through. I'm like that. Then I'm going to go on that side. Oh, excellent, Mark. Yes. Do the other side. Here's where I test on the other side. How long do I want this? Is that about right? I say that's about right. This is important because I'm going to make my knot match the length that I want. I don't want it to be too long. So I just think about that. What is the length of your handle? Now, Lotus is planning lantern walks. We did our first one this year on December 4th. We're planning lantern walks to do them again next year. They're typically something that is done in the fall, kind of to celebrate the night, because the nights are getting longer. And you want something that you have a handle on to carry. So again, that's a reason you want a handle on your lantern. And we're getting there. And now you see, I can lift my lantern and it's beautiful. And nothing will show. Again, nothing will show. If I decide, hey, that's a little too long, let me cut off the end, I'll cut off the end there, because that makes me happy. So, how are you going to see this? You can say, I don't know. How am I going to see this? You're going to need some kind of light source. Now, we want you to have a safe light source. And these are made of paper and wood, right? Pretty easy to burn. If it were glass, I'd say candles all the way. But you might want not to use real candles, but to use LED candles. These are pretty cheap. You can find them everywhere. In fact, if you make it and you need candles, I'll even say you can call our Lotus hotline at 812-336-6599, because we have some of these to still give away. So if you need candles, LED candles, call us. We'll have a few to give away. If you want to invest in the long term, you might buy your own. If these candles are a little bit too blah for you, if they don't give you enough of a punch, you can always buy one of these starry strings. And what's so wonderful about these is they've got their own switch to turn on and off. They have a little bit more light. And when you stuff them, let me put them into this lantern right here. When you stuff them in, you get nice light going all the way around. And I don't know, but let's see what this looks like in the dark. I think you're getting a better sense of it right now, are you not? So that's a really pretty candle. And it gives you light all the way around. So again, these strings of light, pretty affordable. I know they're available on Amazon, and safer than a candle. And have a good life, so 72 hours. You can turn it on and off for 2 hours a day for how many days is that? 36 days. You do the math. I don't know. All right. So hopefully you now have a really good idea of how to make your wooden frame lantern. Some of these ideas can be used in other kinds of transparencies, so they're not new. These are really old ideas of decorating. We've particularly taken these from several countries in Europe where transparencies are a big way to celebrate the holidays. But again, any time of year that you want to have a lantern, it's nice to know you can make your own.